All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning, and good morning, good morning, good morning. But anyway, let's kind of get to some stuff. So I really feel like the last 3 months we've gotten nothing accomplished. And that's so far from the truth, but that's the way it feels. Like, for instance, if you said to me, hey, Ant, in the last 3 months, what's the difference between where we are now and where we were? A lot of the answer would be complete intangibles. And you would say, well, Ant, if you can't measure them and they have some value that's in the far off universe, and if they have value and when they have value and could they have value, that's not something that is a credible answer. It's not reasonable. I would I would say that's fair, right? Like that's a fair criticism. I would also say with the track record, it would be a little unfair, but the track record would also say, well, Ant, if we're going to bring up your track record, you actually haven't accomplished anything yet. In fact, the value of everything that you've said you've accomplished is still out in the forever, never, never, never land, which I then would say is fair. So it comes to this dichotomy, like this binary point in time that is December 30th, 2024. Is this person, speaking of me, just a whimsical, masterful storyteller, or is this person still achieving things that are intangible, but then can all be brought together to make something of the whole? And I think that my answer is biased by definition, right? Like I am me, so I go with the so I go with the latter. But I do believe if someone came to the conclusion of the former, I think they can make an argument, right? Like I think, and again, everything that the way I think now is much more in the court of law, and I don't mean legal. I mean since everything we do is behavioral science background, and because half of my life is in court because of divorce stuff, that it is not lost on me that my way of thinking is no longer A leads to B leads to C, but it's actually far more minute. It's A leads to 8.1 to 8.2 to 8.3, which blah 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 equals B or leads to B. And the good and bad of that is, the bad of it is like, all right, Aunt, you sound like when I was with my family for Christmas, my cousin who just got sworn in as a lawyer, and she's like remarkable, right? Like she college scholarship and blah blah blah, right? Like she's a really really smart girl. So I was looking forward to getting into an argument with her just to kind of test the water, see how I stand against someone that's really quite impressive. If you ask her, she would say she handily kicked my butt, but I think that's a younger cousin thing. But during the argument, she would say, you're so semantical, you're so nuanced. And I would say to her, well, these things matter. Like you're making a conclusion not found in evidence, right? Like you're saying A leads to B. But what I'm saying is A can lead to this before it ever gets to B, because it has to, you're assigning and presuming that this can lead to this, but life isn't a straight line. And to the point, my uncle, her father, and my godfather stepped in at the end and goes, I never really agree with Ed. And hey Travis, my family calls me Ed because when I was younger, I looked like Eddie Munster. And only now in my 30s do I realize how offensive that is. But you're Ed, you're Ed. But he goes, I normally look to disagree with Ed, but I think he's right. And my uncle is a senior vice president of Citibank, right? And he went to all the fancy schools and got the really fancy diplomas, and, not to get into his life or financials or all the rest of it, but, top 1% of people. So you can grade it the way you want, but I think she's biased in saying that she won. And I think her father, who wanted to have a bias to say his daughter won, actually was the anti-bias in terms of citing that he believed my argument better, so I think I won. But the point of the story being, I kind of lost the point, but everything is quite semantical, but not purposely. It's actually just quite nuanced. So over the course of the last 3 months, our tech team has been still building out this app. Now they have building it in consortium with Apple, and that's not to be confused with Apple has, developers that are helping us. That's not the case. Excuse me. What it does mean is Apple opened up all of their final step, blah, 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 final resources to us, have approved us for everything needed, like approved us to be on test flight, approved us to launch the app, approved us to launch to a 400 person test group to work out whatever kinks we think may be existent. And then upon us working out the kinks, we have that fast-tracked, expedited, give it back to Apple. They look at it and say, okay, we already approved it. Now let's look at the differences and alterations you've made. Great, it's approved on the App Store. But it's not on the App Store, right? So Ant, you have all of this, but if you don't have the bread and you only have the ham and cheese, you don't really have a ham and cheese sandwich. And I agree. You don't have the ham and cheese sandwich until you have the sandwich part. So again, you have to have the ham and cheese before you have the bread to make a sandwich. But two things are true. You need the components to equal the whole, and while having only the components, you do not equal the whole. And that could be, you could think of Monopoly. If you have Park Place, you cannot put a hotel because you don't have Boardwalk, right? So progress and objective achievement can be analytical. And antithesis, whatever. They could be opposites, right? Okay, so our tech team has been, but our tech team is also kind of frustrating, right? Because if anyone is old enough to have seen the movie Groundhog's Day with Bill Murray, every week starts the same way, and we talk over the weekend, but Monday's really give me the update. I believe blah, blah, blah. And then by Wednesday, it's and then something happened. And then by Friday, it's I'll work through the weekend. And then Monday, it's back to I believe. And I do not, when you're inventing something, I always put that prism on, right? We're inventing something. It's not, oh, well, this should take X period of time. And we can certainly have our parameters, right? Because you have to manage business expenses and expectations and et cetera, which I'm probably the poorest at, right? And I think everyone would agree with that. And probably to a portion is some of this, but to that point, if he said to me today, hey, Ant, everything is perfect, it would not change anything, right? So it's, I'm not going to delegate or hand off any of the failure that one would attribute to me onto him, because that's just not the case. But that being said, as Groundhog's Day would go, I believe we're almost there as it pertains to that. Because there's only, whack-a-mole is a fun game, but there's only so many moles you can whack, right? At some point, you whacked all the moles. And I think we thought maybe there was 5 moles and there was really 500. That's how far the disparity is, because I believe we've been working on this project for 7 months now. And could I be wrong to a exponent of 100 again? Maybe, sure. But I do think we're close. And again, I do have many calls with our tech team, and I do go through the code. Not that I know what any of it means. Thank you, Brian. But I can see this leads to this, because we've also have other programs connected to it that's able to delegate where the problem is, write out the log, fix the problem, rerun. Okay, now another problem showed up. So it's not blindly going through code saying what doesn't work. There's a constant difficulty in running it, and every time you have the difficulty in running it, hence the whack-a-mole, it identifies where it is. And again, with the access that we have to all of the greatest things ever, we're constantly fixing it, which actually, I've been very reluctant to say the next sentence out loud, but because I do think I could be wrong, but I do think the emotional answer is that I'm right. I really believe it. I believe I can be convinced that my next sentence is right. I believe everyone on this call can be convinced that the next sentence is right. And I do think that's a proof of cognitive bias and bias in general. I believe with the AI resources we have right now, I could build the app and it would take me a week. Now, for that to even come close to being correct, it would mean that my will to persevere and achieve is greater, is now I do think it's greater than my team, but I think that's innate in me. Like I think I'm the greatest in sliced bread, and that's a cause of good and bad, but that's who you're looking at, right? Like that's my personal bias. But I'm also reasonable and logical enough to believe that I don't think that I'm, say, how many weeks are in 7 months? There's 4.3 weeks in a month times 7, 28 times 3. So 30.8 weeks are in a month, in 7 months. I don't think I'm 30.8 times greater, or that perseverance is 30.8 times greater from a base of no knowledge coding to someone who spent their career coding, right? So I don't think factually it even comes close to meeting the standard of being true, yet I believe it. So a lot of what we've been doing lately is let's collaborate a little bit. Let's just get on a call, talk it through to me, and it has worked, right? Like, oh, I'm banging my head against this. Well, have you ever thought about this? Oh my goodness, that actually makes sense. So there's a lot of resources, including my own input, which takes my time, which, you grow up hearing, time is money, and no one's really ever that important enough to believe that. But at some point in life, you do realize time is money, which actually is to the point of why we don't have many of these calls, because not only do the calls go an hour, but then and edit is like a 4-letter word in this one. Actually, it is 4 letters, right? I don't edit them in like, oh, let me take out this part, but I try to make it more concise, get rid of the whole 3-minute soliloquy in the beginning of like, hey, what's up? And whatever dull moments, or if there's a moment of me running to the window because trucks are drag racing down my block, stuff like that. But it does take, let's say, on the whole, maybe 3 hours to get this call accomplished, edited, and disseminated. And that time matters. But it also matters to always be available. So, I'm here. So that's going on with the tech side. With the personal side, I gotta tell you something. So I've always, yeah, right. So I've always believed that, and like your parents have told you, if you get caught doing something bad, put down the shovel, don't continue to dig. And that's very, very good advice, because the wisdom in the advice is whatever you did, it can be like, by acknowledging it, you are a good faith actor and say, hey, listen, whether I did this nefariously or benevolently, like I didn't mean it, or maybe I did, but I've learned in a very quick period of time that it was bad. And I think that coming forward and saying that it was bad allows me to have the best chance at achieving an outcome that isn't so bad, right? Like you get caught stealing a Snickers bar, and you walk out and you realize there's a camera there, and you realize the attendant has a sign up saying, if you steal a Snickers bar, we're going to prosecute you. And after you take the Snickers bar, you look back in the store and see there was a camera there. Reasonably, you could deduce, okay, it says if I steal a Snickers bar, there's a camera that saw me, the guy was away. So obviously when he does his whatever to enforce that sign, at the end of the day, he's going to say, all right, I was gone from 3:32 to 3:33 p.m. Let me look at the camera there. There was someone that I did see. So they see. So I can reasonably deduce I got caught stealing a Snickers bar, and they're going to prosecute me. Now, what's prosecution, right? You got caught stealing a Snickers bar. Maybe there's $100 fine. Maybe they put your photo up and say, this guy steals Snickers bars, whatever. And I say to myself, you know what? I can go back and say, hey, listen, kind of like the Aladdin argument, like I had no money, and I took the bread to feed the little kid that was starving. I know it was wrong. I did it. I ate the Snickers bar. Rather than going through the process of prosecuting me, can I give you $50, or can I give you $20, and we can say, bygones be bygones? Or I can pretend it never happened, be an ostrich, stick my head in the ground, and now when they come to me and say, hey, you stole the Snickers bar, I say that wasn't me. I have a twin that I recently found out. He moved to my town. He might have flown away, but it wasn't me. And now it's like, if they're really, really set on it, right, they're going to say, okay, well, let's go look at the birth record. Again, it's a silly analogy, but it offers the point that the more you dig, now if you get caught using that silly lie, It's like not only did this person do that, and we know that we should definitely prosecute him to the full extent of what he did because he has no remorse and he tried hiding it, but also now he's like a recidivist. Like he's a really, really bad person. He's now making up like exogenous events and elaborate lies to cover it. This person might be a psychopath. Like he really believed it. Like he even passed a lie detector test. Now, why do you do it, right? There's a chance you might not get caught and you might be able to get away from your lie. And even that's a bad outcome because I guess the part that your parents never tell you because there's not a reason to tell it to you, like just don't lie, is the part that if you lie and you get away with it, you become the lie. Like you now have to live that lie actually happened. And now what about 10 years later, you bump into someone that's like, hey, did you ever see your twin again? What do you say? Right? Like, don't you have to continue that lie or do you say I was a liar? Well, you might say, well, Aunt, you should probably say you're a liar. But if you're a liar then it becomes, don't keep digging. And the point that I'm trying to get to, which obviously you can see the whole 8.1, 8.2, and the way things are going on in this head of mine, which probably is the borderline between crazy and genius. And I say that because I have spoken to people lately that are like, I think you might actually be the G word. And I don't ever say that out loud, but it was someone that is very well off and was a stranger to me before that meeting, right? So I'm more or less being a communicator of recent events rather than naming myself, but take it as you like. So anyway, so the reason for all of that is to say that when it comes to divorce, it really is, so let me be careful. I believe, and this is my personal belief, all things being equal, that a mother is a preferred landing spot for children. My personal opinion. And I say that personal opinion with me being like the super duper duper dad that you'd ever know. Like it says daddy on my shirt, right? Like look over my shoulder. I say that, and I'm a very, very credible person to say that because I really do believe I'm like the best dad that's ever existed. And that's not in comparison because I don't know you as a dad, but I believe as a totality of one, I'm the best. All things being equal. The problem is when all things are not equal, what's that margin that now negates that equation, right? Is it all things being equal minus one? All things being equal minus two? What is that? And I think that's a personal thing. With me, the margin was obviously hit where I said, I'm unwilling to accept where the court wants to land this plane. And it's not because of one person, really, because the court system, as defined by law, right? Like how silly, law, is supposed to measure truth and best interests of the children. But for them, because the court is imperfect, right? Like justice is imperfect, but it's the best system we have. So again, I accept the margin of error. I work in a business. I'm a business owner. I accept there's margins of error, especially in far and highly nuanced things. When you're measuring two people that have no criminal records, they're not drug addicts, they're not drinkers, they're not blah, 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 to the court, all things being equal, that's their equation. But when you start getting into the nuance of, well, the court wants to do this, and sometimes they need a little nudge. So they appoint court-appointed lawyers. They don't prosecute perjury. And let me nuance that because I'm not speaking of my significant other or whatever you would call that person. I'm speaking about the system. So there's a thing called the domestic violence court, the domestic violence department. And what either spouse is allowed to do is to go to the domestic violence department and say, whether it's true or not, this person punches me in the face. Yeah, Ed steals my six. This person has punched me in the face, but they do it so masterfully that I don't have any bruises. So the domestic violence department says, okay, oh my goodness, that sounds awful. Write it down and then swear that you are not knowingly lying And if you are caught knowingly lying, you suffer punishment. They don't tell you the punishment, just that you are punished. Yeah. Again, if you're a liar, you would lie. Okay, boop, boop, boop. Now you go to the domestic violence judge. That's an ex parte hearing, meaning that the other spouse is not even allowed to be there. Because again, the court operates in the best interest of the children. If this thing is true, we have to get them in front of a judge because we have to take that other spouse away from the children. So the malevolent person that is lying would be able to camouflage as the benevolent person, the one that's telling the truth, and say, Your Honor, this person punches me in the face. You can't see any of the bruises because they're masterful at concealing it. They put a pillow over my face and punch me, whatever. And I see that from movies, right? Whatever the case may be. The judge says, Are you sure? You have to be telling the truth. Yes, I'm telling the truth. Okay, great. So then the judge says, all right, well, we're signing this temporary restraining order, this TRO. The officers are going to remove that individual from the house. It doesn't matter where they go. It's not our problem. He or she just has to leave, and then you go to trial. So unbeknownst to the other spouse, they are now kicked out of their house and removed from their children. The trial, this person already has a lawyer because the court appointed them a lawyer. The person that was unknowing about any of this has no lawyer. And in fact, the person in my situation is like, I don't want a lawyer. What do I need a lawyer for? I don't need a lawyer. So now the trial goes, and my trial went for 60 days. In fact, on day 47, the judge, which only in retrospect do I realize how insane this is, Mr. Calichone, I already know how I'm going to roll in this case. But I want to offer you guys another chance at working things out. You could work with her lawyer and come up with this thing called custodial restraints. Okay. Now, custodial restraints is where you sign like, okay, this is what we're going to settle on, blah, blah, blah. Now, purely on principle, you're not going to, let me take myself out of it, purely on principle, in a situation where someone believes that they are being brought to such a situation against their will by weaponization of a legal system, and especially if they have a high ethical and moral obligation that they believe is to others that are going through similar situations based on the experience that they're having. No, I'm not agreeing to anything. You can go kick rocks. I'll take this to decision. Okay. I actually tried to, though. Like, I was messaging the lawyer back and forth, and the lawyer just wouldn't get back to me. Because what you find is that these people know that if they continue kicking the can down the road, there is a certain timeline where, well, it's been so long, and this is what it is, blah, 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 whatever. Okay. So then, on day 60, the judge comes out and dismisses everything. Everything. There was like a list of 10 allegations. They were all dismissed, unfounded. Okay. I get invited back into my house. What are you really winning at that point? And I can't go too much into the crux of the case because I have an FRO. Like, I'm final restraining. Like, I'm the most dangerous human being in the world. I have it on my life record. Now, again, it's an appellate's court, right? So, like, I'm being a bit facetious and hyperbolic, but I'm also being factual. It also goes to a point of, I'm saying what I'm saying now, which is kind of being supported by my own belief that in the future it's not going to exist. But again, you as a skeptical person might say, well, that didn't really happen. So the truth is, you have been founded as like a domestic violence abuser, and you're like the worst person in the world. True. Except for the worst person in the world part. But I have been founded as that. Because the next, so I'll get to that. Anyway, so I was unfounded on all these allegations, go back home. 2 weeks later, no, 20 days later, I'm sorry. My spouse, and these are factual, so I'm not, and no one's allowed to message her, right? Because my FRO says if I say anything that causes somebody to then harass her, I'm in violation and like I could go to jail. So I'm saying out loud, you're not allowed to. Anyway, so 20 days later, another TRO gets filed against me. The same exact thing, except one new allegation, and that's called a predicate act. Like, why are you here? And it goes to the same exact judge, which I'm like totally excited about. Great, this person knows what they know. Like, they ruled against everything. And in fact, a direct quote from Judge Coyle, which I'll say her name, and I do not care. I hope she calls me and says, you can't do that, bring it. I often use myself as a litmus test. And Mr. Calichon, was he frustrated? Yeah, in fact, if it was me, I would be a lot less pleasant. Mr. Calichon, from what I see, is literally fighting for his life. It's his family, it's his children, it's his business. Yeah, he's a little extra. He's, submitting all of these things, but I understand why he's doing it, right? So somebody that says that type of stuff, you're like, okay, great. They're the judge again, and they're going to see all the same. Okay. So, and before this happened, my children were taken from me again because they were just removed from my house, concealed and detained without my consent. And those are facts. So again, I'm not saying anything about anyone. In fact, I'd even say who did it, but that's what happened. And then this TRO then solidified that wherever the kids are, they're going to be, and I'm unable to even contact them, which carried on for a very, very long time. At the conclusion of that TRO hearing, I handed in all of the evidence the day before, and you guys know me by now. It was like I sent it to Staples. It was a book that big of why everything was false. Okay, like beyond a reasonable doubt, like I knew. And to that point, the plaintiff also simultaneously and equally filed a municipal court, which was dismissed with the plaintiff's consent. So it's like when it went to a court that actually, looks at this thing called evidence and has a real legal standard, dismissed. But in family court, there's the legal standards preponderance of evidence, which quite literally means what's more likely than not. And for those that know me, you can argue anything two different ways. In fact, with the proper amount of nuance, you can argue the sky is green, right? And, shocker, right? But, so now it's really just comes down to what the judge feels like. So for those that remember, when it was my daughter's first birthday, which I did not even get to be a part of because all this nonsense was going on, I wrote a Facebook thing, and it wasn't for anyone in particular. It was for that, like, when my daughter gets to a certain age, she could look back and see, like, my dad never forgot me, even though he's not in a picture, because I believe girls should have good dads, especially, right? And blah, blah, blah. And don't worry, all the bad becomes something. And I would like to institute a new law one day called the Morris Law. My daughter's name is Morris. That should a parent, and it didn't say any parent, it did not say a specific person, should a parent obtain a TRO that's provably false, that they should be tried for kidnapping when able to be proven. What I didn't know is that the trial judge was actually responsible for fulfilling that whole, like, if you're lying, you should be punished. So the trial judge took it as a direct assault on her in open court. So with the trial judge, Judge Coyle, who's the most miserable human being in the entire world, then went on to, and that's my opinion, I'm allowed to have an opinion, went on to say, oh my goodness, this whole message to his daughter sounds like he's a family annihilator. This sounds like a suicide note. I believe he's going to murder his wife, murder his children, and commit suicide. And then, I'm not lying, for 97 minutes, excoriated me, screaming at me, yelling at me. In fact, would read things that I wrote in a really ugly language, and then say, see the way he says these things? Assigning auditorial criticism on words that she read out loud, presumably in the point of view of me. And I'm like, this person's nuts. So she assigned the FRO, and this book of evidence, you say, I didn't even read it. I throw it out. Oh, are you? Now, mind you, so after she said the first 20 minutes where you're going to kill everyone, blah, 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 I need to call a 20-minute recess to call DYFS. I need to call the police. I need to warn people. Comes back from a 20-minute recess, allows the plaintiff's lawyer to continue talking really, really bad about me, and then goes, oh, Mr. Calichon, you want to defend yourself? In what world? In what world am I going to say anything that's going to cause you to say, oh, oops, my bad, right? So I said, Your Honor, I'm just going to appeal the decision. I rest. And that's when the next 97 minutes happened. In fact, during those 97 minutes, she even looked at the clock and said, oh, I have more time because he doesn't want to defend himself. So that's an appellate court, and all final briefs have been handed. We're just waiting for a decision. And that decision will come down. I cannot imagine it. Like, I cannot imagine it going against me, put it that way. Should it go against me? Reconsideration motion, state supreme, like you're not going to get me when I have all the evidence. I gave you all the evidence, and you said that I'm like all these bad things and made it quite clear that there was no way you were going to find me innocent. And you were setting up a situation that was purposely designed to poke sticks at me and watch me outlash so that you can find, it's almost like a tyrant finds the pretext for their tyranny. The things that were said about me, I actually sat there with my hands over my lips so I couldn't speak. Because the things that were said about me were so ugly, so unfounded, that the only reason for saying it was to get me to argue back. Because then when I argue back, as most normal people probably would, then you would say, see, look how unhinged this man is. And appeal would never happen if like you're sitting there calling a judge 4-letter words, right? So I know things will be okay. But the point of this whole story, and I'm already 34 minutes in, and people are like, Ant, we don't really care about your personal life, but as the founder and owner of this company, all things are connected, so it's like the neck bone's connected to the shoulder bone. And none of it is news to anyone today. In fact, I often thank God for everyone offering me such latitude and respect, but again, two parts of the whole do matter. So that judge is in appellate court, but at the end of it, that judge goes, I'm going to walk 10 feet down the hallway and speak to Judge Higgins, who is our matrimonial judge, and tell her I have concerns over your mental health to put in a mental health evaluation before you could see your kids. Then I filed an emergent hearing with Judge Higgins and said, you have no basis for this. I've never done any of this to you. We're kind of new. Like, I think I've had one hearing in front of you. You have no right to assign me a mental health evaluation. She goes, well, Judge Coyle told me to. I go, am I losing my fucking mind? Like, did you just admit on the record judicial bias that this judge told you what to do? So I put in a motion for recusal, and Judge Higgins, of course, because the judges rule on their own recusals, go figure. She denied the recusal. She does not think she's biased, but the court then took her off my case and put another judge on. That judge then retired 2 months later, and then I got put onto another judge that I'm on now. So it constantly is like this, like new judge, new judge, new judge. The point of the story, and then there's the prosecutor. The point of the story is, rather, it's at a point now, because my son is 3, my daughter's 2, there's 0 founded against me, except for that FRO, which will get overturned or whatever, remanded back, where I could have a fair trial. But barring that, and you could say, well, Ant, you've been founded for something, but I can assure you that I will sooner die than that ever last, because it does not exist. It's just a crazy, wacky, maniac judge. I did not speak in it. I offered the book of it, like, and everything that I was alleged of. Mind you, 80% was recycled from the first TRO, but the predicate act was then dismissed in the municipal court. Plus I had all the evidence that, like, it's not going to stand. Anyway, but now we're 18 months in. I was married for 18 months. Now we're 18 months in. And again, I'm not speaking of my significant other. I'm not allowed to speak of her. I'm speaking of my life. Like, I have a right to talk about my life. So if there's an overlap, blame God. But I'm also saying no one's allowed to all of a sudden start speaking to that person and say, well, I heard Anthony and he said some things that made me want to talk to you, right? Because I'm saying it loud and loud and loud. We're at the point now that, like the Snickers bar, if the court simply said, hey, listen, we got it wrong. Not only have you given us evidence that is all, and I'm not talking about just the evidence from that, I filed over 124 motions. Not only have you given us evidence about the whole thing, not only have you filed 13 indictable, not only have you done all of this stuff that we've ignored, the opposite is true. Because to ignore it from you means we have to find it incredible. Because if we found it credible, we could not leave those children with the person that they're about. In fact, we could not rule in favor of the person. So it's not zero sum. Well, it is zero sum. If they say, hey, Aunt, by the way, we really, messed this up pretty bad, and you were right the whole time, and we want to fix it, so we're going to rule ABC, it is such an enormous financial liability that they have, which means all they want is to find me for one thing. I'm in criminal court in the family division, where I'm not going to get into the specifics, but the prosecutor on the case offered me two deals. The first one was, hey, Aunt, if you admit that you did it, all you got to do is pay a little fine, and you have to speak to a mental health professional so that we know you're okay. Now, mind you, I voluntarily have two mental health professionals as advocates during this whole thing because I grew up in divorce. I understand that somebody could say this person's crazy, and that the court could say, well, just to make sure that that person's not crazy, we're going to, dot our I's and assign you some. I already did that proactively. So I said to the prosecutor, well, I already have mental. Okay, he goes, all right, well, then we could cross that off, but you just have to pay a little fine, but you have to admit you did it. I go, no. He goes, are you sure? You're pro se. You could go to jail for 18 months if you're found guilty. I said, and it's almost like I want to take out sock puppets. I didn't do it. So he comes back to me a week later. Okay, we have another deal for you. We will dismiss everything. You just got to admit you did it. It's like, if I had socks on right now, I would do it. I would take my sock off. So I go, no, I'm willing to go to trial. But Aunt, you're like a pro se. I understand. So I had a talk with that guy, and I go, like, I've given you all the evidence. Why don't you just dismiss it? This is insane. He goes, I'm not allowed to. I go, what do you mean you're not allowed to? He goes, Aunt, I'm not allowed to. Oh. He goes, what I will say to you off the record is I believe you have a reasonable defense. I go, but the standard of criminal court is beyond a reasonable doubt. He goes, I said my piece. He got removed from the case, and they brought in the upper tier, like the head prosecutors, 4 of them. So now we're going motions back and forth. I did a motion to dismiss. They denied it because they're trying to argue intent. And intent is the modus operandi, like what was in my mind at the time. And they said the motion to dismiss can't actually adjudicate intent. You have to go to trial. So then I filed a motion for reconsideration, and I pulled in the head judge, Mark Lemieux, and said, okay, even if you want to make the intent argument, you cannot make it here because for the intent to connect A and B, you're skipping, that's not really A and B, it's A and D, and you're just skipping and making presumptions on B and C. So I do think it gets dismissed, and if it doesn't get dismissed, I'm just going to make them look really silly. That's fine. But to the point of the court saying directly to me, basically, we just need to fine you of something because they know the financial liability. So because I know that, not only is my passion still as grand as it's ever been in terms of I want to do the right thing so people behind me aren't subjugated and abused the way I'm being abused, because I do think in life God gives you, what you can handle. I think when God gives you a moment where it's like, hey, this is going to be really tough, but you are uniquely qualified to see it through and make a change that helps other people, you have to. I don't understand, that's what I believe. So I don't think it's my choice anymore. I have to see it through. And, God gave his only son to do the same exact thing. Like, I'm not equating or conflating. I'm just making, parallels, I guess, right? That's kind of funny, parallels and anyway. But the point is, so that's going on. So to the point, to get back to the last 3 months, just last week alone, I was in front of 4 different judges in 3 different cases. These last 3 months, I believe the court, because I did 2 FV trials, 1 FM case that's been in front of 5 different judges, 1 municipal court, 1 appellate court. I'm in criminal court as we speak. It's an FO docket. I've since reported the psychiatrist that the court tried to mandate on me. They dinged her license because she was acting with misconduct. I'm now going to have to file another appeal for a recent motion, a recent order of a judge, Judge Higgins, who literally is actually not even trying to tell the truth. I have the facts to show, which says, like, by the person, I'm not the lawyer, and she continually is awarding him money, saying he's the lawyer. I go, are you getting out of your mind? So, you know, whatever. She could go to appellate courts, in which case I could connect her to Judge Coyle. So, I mean, it's getting to the point that a couple of things are true. I can say, all right, I cry uncle, this is too much for me. Let's settle on something, you know, 50, whatever. But I think that would be the wrong thing. I think anyone that has allowed such, you know, bad to happen might actually be becoming the bad that they've allowed. And as a father, you have to measure that. Now, I'm not saying anyone is doing that. I'm not saying that person is doing it. I'm saying that becomes a reasonable possibility. And as a father, you have to measure these possibilities for your children. So I cannot do that with good faith as a father. Remember that whole, I think I'm the best father? Well, this would not be that. Also with the courts don't, okay, fine, you know, like, just settle on this little thing and we'll kumbaya. No, they have to save face. They have to nail you. And I'm not willing to be nailed by the court. So I can't even say, okay, let's settle. It's almost like you're on the trapeze and the net's been taken away. So I firmly believe that all of the cards are in my favor. I firmly believe it's checkmate in, say, 8, and it's just a matter of how much time goes by before someone lays down their king. But it's like deep diving and saying you can hold your breath for 5 minutes and then all of a sudden at the 4-minute mark wanting to give up. No, you're going to die. You have to hold it for that 1 more minute. So it's not pleasant, but it's, you know, it's what's been put in front of me. I have no choice. I have to do it. Now, as it pertains to work, I mean, if you're coding AI, you're doing it on behavioral data. So if you have a court of professionals acting in such ways, it's a lot of data that they're affording you to understand human psychology. So again, well, Ant, you're saying something that can't be measured for like 10,000 years, so fine. But it's also true that it does need to be acquired for it to be measurable in 10,000 years. And because you don't think so, does that mean that I don't think so? And it goes back to the very foundation of what invention and patents are. It means I literally think something you never thought of, right? So there is a certain, you can be right, I can be wrong, but to presume that we're going to agree is a false presumption if it's a important variable for you determining if I'm credible or incredible. Because the definition of inventing and patent is that no one has ever thought of it. So there will be a point that we disagree, and that's simply a fact of how our relationship has begun to begin with and how it continues to blossom, I hope, right? So my personal life has been wildly overwhelming. The mayor stuff, which was a good idea, but who in the world has time to ever be mayor? But the mental gymnastics of moving towards that conclusion is valuable in that, okay, again, here comes that 10,000, no, is valuable in identifying what's good and what's not. So for instance, when I had the conversation with the business administrator of my town, he went ahead and said, no, we're not greenlighting anything you're doing. In fact, we're throwing, you need a CO, certificate of occupancy, you need a food license, you need all this nonsense, which is completely nonsensical because I was doing it out of a banquet hall. But because I was doing it every day out of a banquet hall, that was considered a business, considered an office, considered I need all of my own approvals, which was complete nonsense. And I looked at him and I said, I disagree. In which case he then said to me, well, you know what the idea of a good business is? And then told me that they're working with someone who is purchasing QR data matching against payment information to then outsource and bring in marketing ads to get the people what they need when they need it at a discounted price. I said, at the expense of then shutting down every business because you're undercutting them. He goes, that's your opinion. I go, you're actually gross. And that was involuntary. I shouldn't have said it. But he goes, excuse me? I go, no, by every measurement, what you're doing is completely gross. You're quite literally, by definition, selling out your constituents. in which case I had to very quickly say, as to not leave open air for him to say something that he might have regretted, but he would have needed to save face. I thank you for your time. Goodbye. Okay. I then I then posted like an ad about it in one of the newspapers, and very quickly it started getting some traction, in which case he then coordinated with the banquet hall that I was going to be working out of and said, oh, I misspoke. Those certificates of occupancy, and they're not needed. And then quietly said to someone else, the administration's fearful of this guy because he is the first credible person that could ever run for mayor that would outseat this person because, and they gave some reasons. So is that valuable? Still no, it means nothing, but it does allow me to know that I have touched on something that does hit at the core of how small businesses would need to be spoken to, what the things that they can find out, like how they know they're getting ripped off, and what administrations are doing in the pursuit of, let's go ahead and find some profit to manage our municipal expenses, and the small businesses, the hell with them. Especially since it's directed at the town I live in. So is this a person that can then credibly speak to people and can credibly measure themselves against the leading administration in a favorable way that would win over people to the point that could this person then convert followers to voters or handpick who he throws his support behind? Well, the answers all become yes. Now, is that valuable? No. Can it be valuable if it's activated? Yes. So there's a big chest that we have, again, in mystical outer space that has tools in it, such as that we can pull out and start piecing together Scrabble puzzles, right? Like I can put the letters together and make long words. So that was also part of the last 3 months that one could say is a failure, but others can say, well, he's building this treasure chest. And again, there's many ships at the bottom of the ocean that have full treasure chests. There's many people dead with full rounds in their gun, but there are also many people that you don't know of because those outcomes didn't happen to them, right? So it's kind of like a really silly statistic to say, well, there's 10,000 ships with treasure chests. Well, how many are there not at the bottom of the ocean? You don't know because they made it to the destination. Maybe Christopher Columbus was one of them, right? So that's that. Now it gets to what are our next steps? Where are we now? Yeah, the good old boy system. So we are working with PitchBook, which is the most credible, and credible is it undersells them. They have direct access to every single hedge fund, private equity fund, anyone that does private investment. Now, not only to their website where it's like, okay, here's the email, customer service at, globalhedgefund.com. It's the entire team, the entire staff, each one of their individual emails, their individual phone numbers. Then it's an entire track record of not only all the deals they've invested in, but the deals that they are investing in, how much money they have to use, what's the money being used for, it's like a panacea of, you want private equity money, here's the treasure map. And again, there are plenty of ships at the bottom of the ocean with a treasure map, right? Like, it doesn't mean anything, but to the people that found the treasure, you don't know. You don't know who they are because they found the treasure. Could be the Aztecs, could be the Incas, could be Cortez, who's like a complete mental case. But all things being equal, he kind of took over a village that was cutting people's heads off and throwing it down a pyramid. So I really have no idea. So you could call whoever you want a villain and a crazy person in, what was it called? Matuchalin? I don't know. Anyway. So that's now, and I don't want to say the new pivot because it was something that we spoke of, but it is the pivot, which means today I'm doing court stuff. I have an appeal to file and I have a motion to file. Tomorrow, the whole day is, I can't say finalizing because that is not true. I now need to pivot into what we have in TED, what are the use cases for TED, why is TED valuable, and what is needed to unlock that value. Once I'm able to credibly put that together, which again is not so creative that it's going to take weeks. No, this is very, okay, we know what we have. Now let's just organize it in such a manner. Maybe take a day or two. I recorded everything that we have, kind of like this, except I didn't have like a triple digit audience, but it was just an audience of one, me. And I'm editing it down. It was 2 hours because I was able to just speak freely. And now I can edit it down to 20 minutes so I can take the 2 hours worth of like, it sounds so scattered, and put it into a very, very easy video, not vlog, but I guess vlog, right? Like a video of like what this is, and then here's all the black and white to show what it is. When that's done, which I probably have like 7 hours worth of work still, because it's really crazy. Like the other day, the video was down to 116 minutes. I spent 4 hours and got it down to 106 minutes. 4 hours of work took off 10 minutes. Like that's how clear, concise, and like you need to get it. So I believe I probably have 7 to 10 hours left on it. I believe I have probably 8 to 10 hours on getting the reorganization of what that doc would look like. So possibly 20 hours, but 20 hours in my schedule brings us to probably Monday of next week, including Monday. Which means Tuesday of next week, I can then start making contacts. In which case, as we peel this onion back all the way, what is my core competency? What is my career? My entire career has been sales, which again probably goes back to like, is this guy just a good storyteller, or is this guy actually accomplishing something? One of the facts that one could, I guess kind of, what's his name? Patrick Swayze in Ghost with Demi Moore, kind of mold to what they want the outcome to be, is this guy is a career salesman who did it at the highest level, Wall Street, right? Therefore, he has the ability to speak. Okay, great. So I am a horrible person, and the narrative is further cemented by he's just a salesman. Well, on the other path, if this person is going to take these tools in this chest and actually make something of it, he needs to be able to communicate it to people. Now, the communication has not been good in terms of speaking to current investors and managing expectations, maybe, but did I communicate well enough that you became an investor quite quickly? Did I communicate well enough that you're still an investor? Again, whatever path you think, the core competency of that yes that you would say is sales. Therefore, if we go ahead and only take out the nucleus, which is sales, and say, well, your next task is to go ahead and make these contacts and make the sale, well, then we're in a very good position for the next part. And that's what January is going to be. But I'm drastically minimizing all other things in my life, not because I'm just erasing them, but because the month of January does not have such obligations, whether it be personal life, court life, et cetera, and I'm making the only obligation this, because there also is a certain point where it's like ants. If you don't do this, everything else falls, and then this cascades and so it, you know, you need to shore up the hull in hole 1 of the Titanic before the water goes to hole 2, 3, 4, and then all of a sudden you sink and you're next to the ship with the the treasure map and the treasure. So what's important, and what I do need to get out, is I'm pushing back for 1 month the equity assignment and or the choice of taking 2x. That might upset some people because they're like, hey, you can't do that. I'm not going to get into the semantics of why I believe I can, or why I'm simply hoping that you allow it to me without a fight. But that is, regardless of any argument that would come of it, is the coming back with the Snickers bar saying, I'm sorry, and this is what needs to be done. It just needs to be. Which actually is probably not a good analogy, because it's like, it says that I stole something and I never stole anything. So maybe only half the analogy, right? You should not post this public without major editing. The malevolent person is stalking you and watching. Yeah. I love Laura. I don't see her enough. But yeah, so I'm going to edit it, but I also, to Laura's point, there's also a certain amount of when you know you're right, you do want to activate your enemy. And I'm not speaking of my spouse as the enemy. I'm speaking of the court, actually, because the court would have to make these rulings. You want to activate them to come after you if you know you're leading them into a trap, right? Because kind of like when you're president, you don't ever engage with people below you because you don't ever want to be victim to the gotcha moment from someone that doesn't matter. But if someone like Donald Trump says you were never born in this country and now it's gaining popularity, there is a certain point where you have to engage because a lot of people are saying like, and you think it's a moment you could get him. In which case someone like Donald Trump feasted on that and then became the president and the president again. And of course, nothing's a straight line, but you could imagine that was a variable to it, right? That exposed the zeitgeist of a nation into maybe how racist they are, or maybe how they discredited a certain person, or how they believed A, B, C, and D. It doesn't matter. It did reveal the unspoken voice of a certain populace, which ended up being the majority of the country. And you can assign whatever words or bad words. I'm not espousing to any political side of this. But one could say maybe Obama ever responding to it, because if you go back to the Correspondence Dinner of 2011 and see what Obama then said to Trump and Trump was in attendance, you would say that's the moment Trump decided he was going to run for president, right? So I would say by Obama ever engaging with Trump and then trying to make light of that engagement during the 2011 Correspondence Dinner, split reality into two dimensions, one where Trump became president and one where Trump didn't become president. So that's that. I wanted to really give a lay of the land on this call because I haven't really given a lay of the land in quite some time. I wanted to put all of the variables, whether it be personal life, court life, things we're working on, why there hasn't been much progress, why I agree with you, it feels like we haven't done anything, where we are and where we're going. And I've already signed up with PitchBook. I've already paid the invoice. I already have access. I'm now spending the week completing, minus today because I have to do court stuff. I'm spending the week completing the items needed to then make those connections. And then those connections are then based on me and an individual on a sales call with a patent in the biggest industry that's ever existed during its infancy, where everyone is looking to invest in it, with a tech market that has more money than they know to do with America, whose stock market's up 25% year to date, that if you take out the stock market of America, the global stock market is only up 3%. The flow of funds have been consistently for 40 weeks now positive from globe to US. There's so much money in this country. There's so much money going to AI that if you connect the two in an individual that is able to communicate and has a value that is unique in it, I think that's the treasure map. And I think we have it. I think we have each component of it. So while one can say, well, Ant, if you only thought about this a year ago, well, that's the butterfly effect. Well, I don't know if we would have thought about it because what happened this year that led us to this. And while that's semantical and nuanced and argumentative, what is not argumentative, which is really great, is that a patent in AI at the infancy of AI truly is like a fine wine. Nobody is going to tell me that the value of a patent in AI or the value of anything in AI has lost value. In fact, the argument would be, as judging by the NASDAQ stock market, as judging by NVIDIA, Apple, and Microsoft being 21% of the S&P 500, which is the 500 largest companies in this country, 21% of those 500 in terms of value are those three companies. Microsoft owns OpenAI, which is the partnership that we have that's everything. Apple is, just is Apple, right? Like we know Apple. And NVIDIA makes the chips for AI. And Apple, again, I don't mean to just throw them out, like is complete AI because they have the largest networking system of high value consumers because their products are expensive that overlaps almost 100% with who AI is going to need. Plus the applications are endless when you have that moat and network because Apple's a closed end system. And they have Siri, they have their own AI, right? Like, so it's dumb. So what you could say, 3 companies are 21% of the entire S&P 500. In fact, here's a stat for you, and then I'm gonna go because I don't want to sit here and like opine about like just trivia. In 1999, the tech boom, the top 8 companies in the S&P were 22% market cap. 22% the value of the entire S&P was the top 8 companies. Now it's the top 3. In fact, the top 8 companies today are 38.5% of the S&P. So when we look back and say the biggest boom in tech was the .com, and subsequently what happened? It completely busted, right? But it busted in market value. In fact, the Amazons, the Apples, the Microsofts are who we're talking about today. But when you compare the magnitudes, what we're going through today, and it's still in the infancy, is 2 times the magnitude of the peak of the .com. So to say that we are not in the perfect time and the perfect everything, and we have everything that we need to be everything that we want to be, while the rollout has been slow and the goal of Rhino has always been, and I said since day one, rather than ever going public or ever taking private money, we wanted to kind of peel back the curtain and show what a startup from this point looks like when it has goals of being something quite big. And we're going to have ups and downs and headaches and blah, but you're going to be a part of it on a day-to-day basis. So whatever headache you have, you are the culprit of your own headache, because full disclosure, I did say we're going to have headaches. And mind you, I'm probably the reason for your headache. I'm going through divorce court. Apparently I'm the reason of a lot of people's headaches. But I think I'm pretty cool, and I will have that on my gravestone. So in conclusion, the month of January, I can objectively say will be objectively pass or fail, because by the first week of January, we should have, say, 500 outreaches. By the second week of January, not only should we have had some engagement back, but we should have, say, 500 follow-ups. By the third week of January, we should have some preliminary discussions. We should have some type of understanding of what we have and what the market is, and can we accept something right now if we wanted to. And by the fourth week of January, we should, hey, listen, we have, and again, if you remember, we had this like 3 months ago. We had a $2 million offer on the table and we declined it. You know, by the fourth week of January, we should have a certain, like, we can take this offer. We are there. And January is my report card that I'm self-imposing to deliver to you, because January is objectively full of measurables. So I'm going to outline that in the Sunday email. But otherwise, I love y'all and I appreciate y'all, and I really do. It's you know, we've come a long way, and you know, not crossing a finish line doesn't mean you're not going to. It just means we're still in the journey. A marathon is a long time, and I wish the marathon wasn't as long. But there's no victory in achieving, well, I died at the 20th mile. You got to get to the 21.2, and we will, or 26.2. Again, double check the marathon. I think it's 21.2. And if it's, you know what, let's just get to 30 and make sure that we got the whole marathon, right? Love y'all, and I'll see you. Bye.